Distinguished delegates, I invite you to regain your seats, please, so we can start our plenary. I call to order the 5th plenary meeting of the 21st session of the Assembly. We will begin today. Please, could you please regain your seats so we can start the plenary? We will begin today with agenda item 11, consideration and adoption of the budget. What is going on? We will begin today with agenda item 11, consideration and adoption of the budget for the 21st financial year. We will first hear a statement by the Registrar of the Court, Mr. Peter Lewis, and then a presentation by the Chair of the Committee on Budget and Finance, Mr. Werner Drummel. I draw your attention to the documentation before the Assembly, in particular the following documents. The proposed program budget of the International Criminal Court for 2023, document ICC ASP2110, and its corrigendum and addendum. The report of the Committee on Budget and Finance on the work of its 38th session, document ICC ASP21/5, the report of the Committee on Budget and Finance on the work of its resumed 38th session, document ICC ASP/21/5/addendum 1, and the report of the Committee on Budget and Finance on the work of its 39th session, document ICC ASP/2115. Additional relevant documentation is indicated in the annotated list of items of the provisional agenda, ICC ASP21/1 Addendum 1. I now invite the Registrar of the Court, Mr. Peter Lewis, to present the Court's proposed program budget for 2023. You have the floor, Mr. Registrar.
Your Excellency, President of the Assembly of States Parties, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, it's a great honour to be addressing the 21st session of the Assembly of States Parties and my last ASP session with you. And I just want to say what a privilege it's been to work with you all. In 2023, the Court will face an unprecedented workload in terms of both volume and complexity, with operations in 16 situations, 3 simultaneous trials in 3 courtrooms, 6 cases in trial and pre-trial, ongoing reparations proceedings in 5 cases, and at least 10 ongoing investigations. To deal with this workload, the Court has proposed a total annual budget for 2023 of $186 million, an increase of $32 million or 20.6% over the current year. For the Registry, the 2023 proposed budget amounts to $93 million, an increase of 17.9%. In addition to the unavoidable increases due to inflationary pressures this year, the budget increase for the Registry is mainly driven by 2 cost drivers: the provision of services for at least 3 simultaneous trials next year, and the provision of services for 4 new active investigations. The Committee of Budget and Finance, after a careful review, recommended an increase of 24 million, or 16%, to our current budget. Out of that 24 million, just over 13.5 million corresponds to inflationary pressures. I want to thank Ambassador Drumel and the CBF for their careful and detailed scrutiny of the court's budget. That scrutiny has, I hope, confirmed that the court has exercised strict budgetary discipline and requested only the resources that were absolutely necessary. The combination of additional work, additional situations, and significant inflationary pressures on the court means that we do not have the flexibility in our budget beyond the cuts already recommended by the CBF. I want to say a word about liquidity. A number of states parties are in arrears or have not yet paid their contribution for this year. As a result of this, the court is again facing a serious liquidity shortfall. Thankfully, with an important payment for the 2022 budget at the end of November and two very important advance payments from states parties, we will be able to pay our bills until the end of this year. However, in doing so, we will have exhausted the working capital fund, which means we have no money to start 2023. I therefore urge the states parties who are still in arrears or who have not yet paid their outstanding contributions for this year to do so as soon as possible. And I urge all states parties to pay their contributions for 2023 as early as possible, and hopefully in January, so we can start the year with funds to be able to pay our bills. Allow me at this stage to express my thanks to Ambassador Valdeverde, the facilitator on arrears, for her support and active efforts this year to help us tackle the arrears situations. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, the ultimate decision on the budget now rests with you to determine the resources that you believe the court needs for the extraordinary year we will face in 2023. I would like to particularly express my thanks to the budget facilitator, Ambassador Williams, for her tireless efforts and hard work over the last months. As always, the court stands ready to provide further information in order to assist the Assembly in discharging its functions in the spirit which I hope we have always shown of openness, transparency, and a candid dialogue. Thank you very much.
I thank the Registrar for his intervention, and now I give the floor to the Chair of the Committee on Budget and Finance, Mr. Werner Drumel.
Madam President, thank you very much. Distinguished delegates, I would like to thank you for the opportunity to address today and to address you today and to present the main outcomes of our discussions at the three meetings we had over this year, the 38th resumed and 39th session of the Committee on Budget and Finance. At the outset, I would like to take this opportunity to thank my fellow colleagues from the committee for their devotion and hard work during this year, and also to the representatives of the court for their availability and cooperation I also extend my thanks and appreciation to the Executive Secretary, to the CBF and his team for their quality and outstanding support, which is essential for the fulfillment of the committee's mandate. Let me start with some of the challenges the court will be facing in 23. The committee observed with great concern the outstanding status for the payment of contributions and consequently the outlook for the liquidity of the court, which had significantly worsened. As of 30th of November 22, a grand total of 40.9 million in contributions was outstanding, out of which 31.2 million from prior years and 12 states parties with combined areas of 14 million would not be able to vote in accordance with Article 112 of the Rome Statute. As far as the liquidity situation is concerned, the committee noted that by the end of the financial year of 2021, a liquidity shortfall of about 9.9 million had only been averted because some states parties had been prepared to pay their contribution for the fiscal year 22 in advance in December 21. Commendable as these early payments by some state parties are, they have potentially exacerbated the liquidity situation in the fiscal year 22. As for this fiscal year, the court received, as we just heard from the registrar, again from some states parties, cash in advance of the 23 assessed contributions, which resulted in not depleting entirely the work capital fund. Over the years, many recommendations have been made to improve the financial situation of the court by the external auditors, by this committee, and also the independent experts. All these recommendations had not had their desired effect. The committee urged state parties to pay their contributions immediately after receiving the note verbale from the court at the beginning of each year. In the context of the ongoing challenging liquidity situation, the committee was concerned that with the expected significant increase in activities, that the current level of the precautionary reserves would not be sufficient to ensure the adequate functioning of the court. A replenishment of the contingency fund up to its notional level of 7 million, as recommended by the committee at its May session, and the approval and replenishment of the level of the working capital fund at 1/12 of the previous year's approved budget appropriation would be necessary. In light of an expected nearly 100% implementation rate of the 22 approved budget, the replenishment of the contingency fund by the unused amount of this year's budget may, for the first time, not be possible. A further challenge will be the longer-term impact of significant increases of the budget. Most of new staff requested are GTA positions, which will be, if approved, only funded partially in 23 for a range between 3 and 9 months, and will highly likely have to be fully funded in 24 and beyond. A significant increase in staff raises also the challenge for the court, since it requires the capacity to recruit in a timely manner of an appropriate workforce. As pointed out in the Court's last report, additional voluntary funds could also lead to an asymmetrical growth across the organs and could result in an increased requirement of resources, meaning that the injection of voluntary contributions, as positive that may be, creates additional pressure on the ordinary budget for the main organs of the Court. The new posture of the Court, introduced by the prosecutor, with more extended reliance on digitalization and data science, will, accelerated by the extra budgetary resources from the OTP Trust Fund and as a response to rapidly evolving technological environment, have an impact on the Court's operation. Those necessary changes will lead to resource demands increases and coordination challenges across the Court with financial implications for future budgets. A longer-term challenge will also be the upkeep of the premises and the capital replacement. On the basis of a new, fully impartial evaluation of medium and long-term plan of capital replacement, as advised by the pro bono expert, a decision has been made at the Hague Working Group facilitation on premises to hire an independent consultant to conduct an external evaluation. All solutions have in common that they require commitment to a reliable long-term funding from states parties. A final challenge may be the evolution of the inflation in the coming years. Further increases in the UN common system cannot be excluded. The Court has managed to limit the inflationary impact on staff costs for next year's budget, but expects prices to be significantly higher for the budget year 2024. I will move to human resources. The committee considered the proposed changes to the financial regulations and rules on inter-organ mobility, especially on temporary assignment of staff members across the organs, and noted that this would both encourage internal workforce mobility and enable the Court to allocate resources to its highest priority areas, and should further enhance the learning and development opportunities to staff during their career in the Court. Therefore, the committee recommended the Assembly to approve the amendments. The Court's initiative on the National Professional Officer NPO category was welcomed by the committee, and it recommended that the courts develop clear guidelines, such as on the temporary nature of NPOs, the conversion of vacant posts to NPOs, and concerning the heads of country offices. The committee wished to be informed on the developed guidelines. The committee also recognized the advantages provided by the United Nations voluntary program and recommended that the Court report at its next session in May 23 on how it will be used as part of the human resource force and whether amendments to the staff regulations and rules will be required. And finally, an important element on the human resources in the human resources chapter being the tenure policy. The committee analyzed the tenure policy, which has been assessed positively by the review mechanism. The committee recognized some advantages of the tenure policy, such as the introduction of fresh thinking, an objective pointed out in the recommendation 105. However, it noted important challenges which would deserve careful examination, such as effects on productivity, financial implications, the legal risks due to unequal treatment between current and newly appointed staff, and this specifically in the area of pension and after-health service insurance. I move now to the OTP Trust Fund and secondment of personnel, which has been intensely discussed with the Court. As informed by the Court, the total amount received for the Trust Fund is currently 6.3 million, excluding the EU grant of 7.25 to enhance the technological tools used by the Office in collecting, processing and storage of evidence. The Trust Fund was established by the Registrar according to Article 116 of the Rome Statute and Regulations 7.2 and 7.4 of the Financial Regulations and Rules, which govern voluntary contributions in the Court. Resolution ICC ASP1, Resolution 11, delegates to the Registrar the evaluation that offered contributions do not affect the independence of the Court and fulfill the criteria established by the Assembly. The Court came to the conclusion that the donations to the OTP Trust Fund are consistent with the nature and function of the Court and do not involve additional liabilities to the Court. According to the rules, the voluntary contributions will be subject to the Court's regulatory framework and the accounting principles, as well as subject to auditing by external auditors. A total of 74 national experts from judicial, law, military and law enforcement agencies were committed by some states parties on the secondment basis for all situations. A proper integration of seconded personnel in the various teams of the OTP is essential. The OTP and the Registry developed in close cooperation standard procedures for the selection and onboarding of these seconded national experts, building on existing precedents. Secondees report to the head of their respective team. They are required to sign an oath of office and a confidential undertaking where they commit to avoid any action which may reflect adversely on their status as members of the teams of the OTP. Their salaries and entitlements are funded by the lending agency. The cost of deployment, while deployed to a unified team, will obviously have to be covered by the OTP. The relationship between extra budgetary and regular budget funds has been carefully considered by the committee. The contributions are seen by the Court as complementary and supplementary to the core resources requested in 2023 proposed programme budget. They do, however, have an impact on the overall budget, as I pointed out before. The committee requested the Court to update it on the OTP Trust Fund spending plan and the secondment of personnel at its session in May. And now finally, on the consideration of the 2023 proposed programme budget, the Court requested a programme budget of 186.8 million, including the host state's loan. The budget presented an increase of 20.6% or 30.2 32 million against the total approved budget of this year. After carefully reviewing the budget proposal and the justifications provided, the committee concluded that total reductions could be achieved in the amount of 7.2 million. This represents an adjusted total increase of 24.7 million or 16% compared to the 2022 approved budget, including the host state loan. Therefore, the committee recommended the Assembly to approve a budget of 179,576.6 thousand, including the installments for the host state loan. Given the substantial unavoidable cost factors due to the inflationary pressures for non-staff costs and the UN Common System adjustment totaling 13.4 million, the substantial reductions recommended by the CBF resulted in a real increase of 11.3 million or 7.3%. The committee considered that in spite of these substantive reductions, the operations of the court will not be negatively impacted. Madam President, I thank you very much, and I thank you for your attention.
I thank the Chair of the Committee on Budget and Finance for his intervention. And now we move to Agenda Item 12, consideration of the audit reports. I draw your attention to the following documentation before the Assembly: the financial statements of the International Criminal Court for the year ended 31st December 2021, document ICC ASP21/12, the financial statement of the Trust Fund for Victims for the year ended 31st December 2021, document ICC ASP/21/13, and the External Auditor's Performance Audit Report on Temporary Personnel, document ICC ASP/21/3. The Assembly will also consider the reports of the Audit Committee on its 15th and 16th session, which are available on the website of the Assembly. I will first give the floor to the Vice Chair of the Audit Committee, Mr. Ayman Ibrahim Hija.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam President, Your Excellencies and distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to thank you for the opportunity to address you today and to present the main outcomes of our discussions at the 15th and 16th sessions of the Audit Committee during 2022. May I also take this opportunity to reiterate my appreciation to my colleagues from the Audit Committee for their devotion and hard work, and to the representatives of the Court for their participation and valuable contributions. I would like also to thank our Executive Secretary and his team for their consistent hard work and effective support to the Committee throughout the year, upon which we heavily rely. The first session of the Audit Committee was held virtually as a consequence of the COVID restrictions from 7th to 9th of March, coordinating different time zones and limiting the topics of discussion, and while the second session was held in The Hague from the 18th to the 20th of July. I will now briefly summarize the main discussions held during the 15th and 16th sessions of the committee as captured in its final reports issued on 7th of April and 8th of September 2022, respectively. Madam President, the committee focused at its two sessions on the 5 areas of its mandate: A, the governance; B, oversight of internal and external audit; and risk management, and then values and ethics. In the area of governance, the committee was pleased to see that the new Surface Transport Manual was included information on vehicle leasing reflecting the committee's recommendation. Also, the committee discussed the upcoming expiry of terms of office of three of its members. Two of them will complete their second term at the end of 2022 and explore the steps, timelines, and formalities to be followed for the selection process of the new members. On behalf of the committee, I would like to extend our appreciation to Mr. Samir Abulogod and Ms. Elena Sukova for their dedication and professional work. The Assembly was recommended to approve the reappointment of Ms. Clarissa van Hernden from South Africa, as well as for the appointment of Mr. Faizul Chaudhary from Bangladesh for the term of 3 years starting 1st January 2023. On the area of oversight of internal audit matters, as part of its oversight of internal audit matters, the committee discussed the audit report of the Office of Internal Audit, the fleet management policy, the status of implementation of the year 2021 and 22 internal audit plans, and the reassessment of the 2022 internal audit plan, and lastly, the draft work for 2023. The committee raised a number of recommendations to enhance the quality of the internal audit reports. The committee noted with concern the continued delay in the audit submission and recommended the Office of Internal Audit to put in place a contingency plan to overcome such delays by applying an agile approach to audits. Following the current delays on the status of implementation of the internal audit plan for 2022, the committee reiterated its concern about the low implementation levels of the internal audit plan, which is a recurrent matter every year. The Audit Committee further noted that the second quarter update showed a reduction of 2 of 10 audit assignments from the 2022 internal audit plan with no justification. The committee largely noted the lack of a specific time frame agreed with the court on addressing and implementing each of the recommendations raised by the Office of Internal Audit. On the area of oversight of external audit matters, as part of its oversight of the external audit matters, the committee discussed the financial statements of the court for the year ended 31st December 2021, the financial statements of the trust fund for the 2021, and the external auditor's report on temporary personnel. With regard to the financial statements of the court and of the trust fund for the victim for the year 2021, the committee observed that based on the opinion of the external auditor, the financial statement present fairly in all material respects the financial position of the court and the trust fund for victims for the year 2021 and the financial performance, the changes in net assets and equity, cash flows, and the comparison of budget and actual amounts of the year ended in accordance with international public sector accounting standard. The external auditors issued 5 recommendations for the financial statements of the court and 2 recommendations for the financial statements of the trust fund for victims. The committee is concerned that the external auditor had identified gaps in internal control that were not identified by the Office of Internal Audit during their normal audit work, and therefore recommended the Office of Internal Audit to focus more closely and thoroughly on the internal controls in place and whether they are working effectively. The committee recommended that the Assembly approve the financial statements of the court and the financial statements of the trust funds for the year ended 31st December 2021. With regard to the audit report of the external auditor on temporary personnel, the committee noted that the external auditor issued 9 recommendations. The audit committee noticed that there seems to be a great challenge around broader human resources and talent management, together with capacity planning, and recommended that the report be considered by the Committee on Budget and Finance, the CBF, as it is related to human resources and budget areas. On the area of risk management, throughout the year 2021, the court carried out risk management activities following a structured approach in accordance with the administrative instructions on risk management. The Risk Management Committee, the RMC, engaged with managers of the court and collected and considered status updates on the risk registers at the operational level. In addition, the Risk Management Committee liaised with the owners of the court strategic risk and updated the court's risk register. The Audit Committee noted the overall improvements in terms of assessment and presentation and of the risk areas, and further noted that additional areas in the audit assessment had been included as recommended previously by the Audit Committee, and recommended that the Office of Internal Audit include risk appetite in its future risk management assessment of the court. Lastly, in the values and ethics area, the Audit Committee noted that the work on the ethics charter took into consideration the relevant policies concerning harassment, sexual harassment, abuse of authority, and also the policy on sexual exploitation and abuse. The Audit Committee continued to monitor the ongoing work on the development of the court-wide ethics charter, which ran until September 2022 and was followed by a thorough analysis and proposal submitted to the Courts Coordination Council, the COCO. Now, on the subject of the internal independent expert reviews, recommendations, the committee continued to monitor the assessment of the recommendations of the independent expert review that directly impact the committee's mandate. The independent expert reviews recommendations 135, 366, 367, 368, and 370 relate directly to the work of the audit committee. On the recommendation number 135, the committee noted that the BMO focal point had extended the application of this recommendation, initially addressing only the CBF to the audit committee. The committee observed that the agenda items are in line with the mandate established in its charter and emphasized that the charter reflects the best practice and is in accordance with the guidelines of the Institute of Internal Auditors. On recommendation 366, concerning the merger of the CBF and the audit committee, the committee noted that the recommendation was negatively assessed at the BMO facilitation and that it should not be implemented, and that state parties emphasized that the two committees had different mandates. On recommendation 367, concerning the change of the reporting line of the Office of Internal Audit to the COCO instead of the audit committee, the committee noted that while recommendation was initially positively assessed during the third BMO meeting, at its eighth BMO meeting, state parties decided to continue the discussion during the 2023. The committee recalled that during the third BMO meeting, held on 8 July 2022, both the CBF chair and the audit committee vice chair stressed that this recommendation would go against the established practice across UN system, international standards, as well as the recommendations of the formal external auditor, and remarked once more that the Office of Internal Audit should not report to the auditees. Furthermore, at the 8th BMO meeting, following the concern raised by a state party on the impact of the reputational risk for the court, state parties deemed necessary to analyze in detail the assessment of this recommendation during 2023. On recommendation 370, the audit committee noted that it is linked to recommendation 369, the latter suggesting that the Secretariat of the Assembly not be absorbed within the registry. However, as recommended in recommendation 369, as recommended 369 has been negatively assessed by the review mechanism, recommendation 370 becomes redundant. The audit committee supported the independent evaluation review statement on recommendation 370 concerning the functional independence of the executive secretary and strongly recommended that the assembly maintain the current setup. On recommendation 368, whereby the assembly is recommended to make use of the recommendations of the external auditor assessing the oversight bodies, the audit committee noted that this recommendation has been positively assessed at the BMO facilitation without prejudice to the position of state parties to the specific recommendations that were not submitted to the time at the time the IR report was issued. On the 5 recommendations of the former external auditor on the oversight bodies, I would like to refer specifically to recommendation 3 and 4. On recommendation 3, whereby the formal external auditor recommended the Assembly to grant limited number of delegates permanent access to the Audit Committee as non-voting, the Audit Committee stressed on the first place that in order to increase transparency, the Audit Committee suggested to be invited to address the BMO facilitation and has submitted its report to the state parties, and the chair of the committee addresses the Assembly in each session. Furthermore, the Audit Committee will continue to engage with the BMO facilitator on all subjects of interest to state parties. Secondly, it emphasized that the function of the Executive Secretary is extremely crucial to the work of the committee and to the relationship between the Audit Committee and the Court, as well as the state parties. Thirdly, the Audit Committee recommended that the Assembly maintain the same setup of resources provided to a session, in particular the independent function of the Executive Secretary. On recommendation 4, whereby the former external auditor recommended that the suppression of the current composition of the CBF and the Audit Committee, as well as the role of the Executive Secretary. The Audit Committee noted that during the BMO session, it was clarified by the chair of the CBF that there is no Executive Secretariat as referred to by the former external auditor in his report, but rather there is a post of Executive Secretary, with the post holder being a staff member of the Secretariat of the Assembly, who reports on the substantive matters to the chair of the CBF and to the chair of the Audit Committee. Furthermore, the Audit Committee recalled that the United Nations Joint Inspection Unit, the GIU, established that the Audit and Oversight Committees should have administrative support and adequate resources in order to fulfill their oversight responsibilities. The GIU report further stressed that, and I quote from their report, independence and competence of an Audit and Oversight Committee and its members would be rendered ineffective if the committee's administrative support and the resources at its disposal were to be insufficient or unduly influenced by management or other stakeholders. The Audit Committee emphasized that the function of the Executive Secretary and his team is extremely crucial to the work of the Audit Committee and to the relationship between the Audit Committee and the Court, as well as the state parties. The Audit Committee recommended that the Assembly maintain the same setup of the resources provided to its sessions, in particular the independent function of the Executive Secretary. In conclusion, Madam President, allow me to conclude by underlining that since its re-establishment, the Audit Committee has acted as a catalyst in triggering important improvements in many fields within its mandate, such as through an enhanced risk management framework. The Audit Committee further established a more structured follow-up on recommendations, which has contributed to the reduction of risks and the identification of risk mitigating measures. Thus, the Audit Committee has not only provided an additional layer of accountability to the Assembly, but also has given an incentive to all actors to work more closely together to achieve tangible progress in the various areas of its mandate. Thank you all for your attention. Thanks, Madam President.
I thank the Vice Chair of the Audit Committee for his intervention. I will now give the floor to the representative of the External Auditor, Mr. Yang Chang-cho. You have the floor, sir.
Madam President, distinguished ambassadors, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, I'm honored to present to you today the report prepared by your external auditor during 2021, pursuant to Article 12 of the Financial Regulations of Rules of the International Criminal Court. Mr. Jae-hae Choi, Chair of the Board of Audit and Inspection of Korea and External Auditor of the ICC, expressed his deep regrets through me for not being able to make this presentation himself. I would like to give you a brief overview of the 3 audit reports which were filed in July 2022 and which deal with the following: the financial statement of the International Criminal Court for the year ended 31st December 2021, the financial statement of the Trust Fund for Victims for the year ended 31st December 2021, the performance audit on the temporary personnel in all organs of ICC. Based on our audit, we have provided an unmodified audit opinion on the financial statement of the ICC and the Trust Fund for Victims for the year ended 31st December 2021, by concluding that they present fairly in all material respects the financial position, financial performance, changes in net assets, cash flows, and comparison of budget and actual amounts in accordance with the International Public Sector Accounting Standard. Let me first address the audit report on the financial statement of the International Criminal Court for the financial year 2021. It is observed that the total net assets increased by 9.4 million euros, despite a loss of 9.6 million euros in the financial performance in 2021. While the court staff cost decreased slightly by 2.6% in 2021 from 2020, contractual services and counsel fees increased by 18% in 2021. There were noticeable factors contributing to the changes made to the total net assets during the year. For example, assessed contributions receivable decreased by 2.1 million euros due to slight increase of the collection rate. Property, plant, and equipment decreased by 8 million euros from the annual depreciation. Employee benefit liabilities decreased by 17.1 million euros from the change in actuarial assumptions such as discount rate. And deferred revenue and accrued expenses decreased by 2.8 million euros, mainly from the decrease in advance payment received. The external auditor recommended that the ICC make appropriate action plans to recover the overpayment of the relocation grant for judges and strengthen the monitoring of salaries and allowances, formalize procedures for capitalization of components replaced as part of the capital replacement plan, and the recognition of replaced parts in line with IPSAS 17. Developed an administrative instruction on special post allowance, considering the UN system and other international organizations. Established an amounting criteria for approval of a registrar or prosecutor regarding fund transfer. And finally, limit elevated SAP access, mitigate the risk of unauthorized program deployment and configuration changes, ensure that the full SAP data change history is available, and perform SAP access review annually or quarterly. Let me now present the audit report on the financial statement of the Trust Fund for Victims. With the expansion of projects in both reparations and assistance programs, the Trust Fund for Victims' financial performance for the financial year 2021 recorded a substantial deficit of 2.7 million euros, contrary to the surplus for the past 2 years. In 2021, program expenses surged by over 4 million euros compared to the previous year, amounting to 5.8 million euros. However, on the revenue side, with a voluntary contribution of 2.9 million euros, the Trust Fund for Victims suffered a continuous stagnation in the growth of funding sources. Accordingly, net asset equity as at the end of 2021 decreased by a similar amount of 2.7 million euros, totaling 11 million euros, a 20% decline from the prior year. And the level of cash and cash equivalents diminished from 19 million euros in 2020 to 15 million euros in 2021. The external auditor recommended that the Trust Fund for Victims strengthen its multi-layered control system on the implementing partners to enhance the compliance and performance of their activities, and that the detailed information, including the accounting policy concerning provisions of the TFV, changes in provisions and status of project as at the reporting date, be clearly and concisely stated in notes or annex to financial statement to offer more sufficient and understandable information to readers. With regard to the follow-up of previous recommendations, 2 came from the financial audit, 1 from the ICC, the other from the Trust Fund for Victims. Regarding the recommendation to the ICC, voting right of state In areas, it is noted that the recommendation is not fully implemented yet, despite continuous effort by the court. Pertaining to the TFV, we have not identified a multi-annual budget of the TFV showing its annual revenue of voluntary contributions and allocation of resources to a specific program for the years ahead. We concluded both are identified as partially implemented. Next, with respect to our performance audit report on the temporary personnel in all organs of the ICC, we specifically reviewed the budget process, the rules and policies, and geographical representation of staff in non-established positions. Regarding the efficiency and transparency of budget process for temporary personnel, we found that the level of funding for GTA is not substantiated with reasonable justifications for operational needs, and the code does not apply standard vacancy rate to GTA positions. This creates a considerable amount of budgetary slack, which can be used to fund the categories of temporary personnel that are not budgeted for. Accordingly, we recommended the court to improve the relevance and transparency of the GTA budget, which includes reviewing the necessity of long-term vacant GTA positions, considering application of standard vacancy rate to GTA positions, and creating a separate budget line for individual contractors. We also looked into the practice of using unapproved GTAs. The CBF has urged the court to refrain from using GTAs without approval from ASP, but the number of unapproved GTAs has increased since 2017. As a result, the total cost incurred due to unapproved GTAs over the last 5 years exceeded 10 million euros. Accordingly, we recommended the court to either include the unapproved GTA positions in the budget proposal or discontinue them after reviewing their operational needs, while recommending the court to refrain from the practice of using unapproved GTAs in the future. Next area that we looked into was the suspended GTA reform and the management of STAs. The court proposed a reform of the GTA policy in 2015, which would ensure that GTAs are not used to cover regular and ongoing functions, and reported to the CBF that this new policy would be promulgated in 2017. However, the reform has neither been implemented nor discussed in the subsequent CBF sessions. Moreover, the court does not report to the CBF the list of vacant positions covered by STA. So, we recommended the court to conduct a holistic review of the long-term GTA, implement the reform of the GTA policy proposed in 2015 and 2017, and implement measures to enhance the transparency of the use of STAs. Last but not least, it was found that the geographical representation of the code is more imbalanced than that of the UN. We observed that the ICC calculates its desirable range for geographical representation for established posts only, which does not show the actual status of the ICC. In addition, from 2019 to 2021, the ICC recruited the most from overrepresented state parties and the least from non-represented state parties for professional staff in GTA positions. Accordingly, we recommended the court to include the professional staff in approved GTA positions when setting targets for geographical representation, and report to ASP the progress to be made, and to strive to achieve meaningful outcomes toward the equitable geographical representation by employing various methods. I have finished with the representation of the three reports that submitted in 2022 for the 2021 financial year. Let me conclude by mentioning that it is a great pleasure to present the audit report after completing the first year of discharging the mandate as the external auditor, and hope that this effort contribute to improving the ICC's performance and thereby ultimately enhancing the international status of the ICC. Madam President, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your attention.
I thank you for your intervention. I thank again all our distinguished speakers for their presentations. The discussion on the important matters they have reported upon will continue in the working group on program budget later this morning. And now we will make a few minutes pause to allow for the rearrangement of the podium to prepare for the next segment of our meeting now. Our plenary session. I urge you to regain your seats, please. We return now to agenda item 8, report on the activities of the Bureau. First, we will consider the presentation of the Lessons Learned report on the third election of the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court. The mandate for the Lessons Learned on the election of the prosecutor process is derived from the resolution adopted at the 19th session of the Assembly of State Parties, ICC ASP 2018/19/Resolution 6, paragraph 78. In that resolution, the Assembly welcomed the process established by the Bureau of the Assembly of State Parties for the election of the third prosecutor of the International Criminal Court and called upon the Bureau, through transparent and inclusive consultations with state parties and civil society, and with the feedback of the Committee on the Election of the Prosecutor and the panel of experts on the implementation of their mandate within existing resources, to examine ways to continue strengthening the process by which the prosecutor is elected. On 2nd November 2021, the Bureau appointed two facilitators, Ambassador Senja Milenkovic from Serbia and Ambassador Alexander Maršik from Austria, to carry out the lessons learned exercise. The Bureau requested the facilitators to conduct an objective, impartial, and independent assessment of the selection process of the third prosecutor of the ICC. The facilitators periodically updated the Bureau and its working groups on their work throughout 2022. I now invite Ambassador Milenkovic and Ambassador Maršik to brief the Assembly on their report, which is Assembly Document ICC ASP/21/16. I understand that Ambassador Milenkovic will begin. You have the floor, Ambassador.
Thank you, Madam President, and good morning to everybody. My colleague, Ambassador Maršik, and I agreed that we divide this presentation so that I give you the outline of the exercise as it happened, and to highlight the three main points that emerged from all the consultations and talks we had with all the relevant actors, and then Ambassador Maršik will elaborate about the conclusions which you have also seen in the report. So as the Madam President said, we commenced the lessons learned exercise in January this year, following the decision and the mandate by the Bureau. We decided from the outset that we would like to conduct the broadest possible consultations, including all the state parties, civil society, different actors that were one way or the other involved in the process of the selection of the prosecutor, as well as the committee for the election and the panel of experts. So everybody who had a certain role in this process. We organized and conducted two rounds of consultations, in-person consultations with the state parties, one in New York in March, and another one in The Hague in April this year. And we also distributed a technical questionnaire for the state parties to reply, which contained the majority or all the issues we identified as relevant for writing of our report. And I have to say that it is our assessment, at least, that these consultations and the questionnaire exercise have been quite successful and allowed for all the state parties to fully participate and state their views. We also conducted bilateral meetings with all the state parties which were interested in and showed an interest to having additional meetings, as well as members of the committee for the election of the prosecutor and the panel of experts. So we try to really encompass the broadest possible interlocutors. In addition to that, we had also consultations with the civil society representatives of the NGOs. There was one online session upon request by the NGOs due to the fact that they are on different parts of the globe. And we had a series of meetings with interested NGOs who wanted to have additional consultations and additional views to share with us. As a result of this very comprehensive process, about which we regularly informed both the Bureau and the Hague and New York working group respectively, we wrote a report which was presented to the Bureau mid-October this year, and afterwards to both working groups, which we thought reflected in most elements everything and all the views that we heard during the consultation process. Now, before closing, I would like to highlight the three main points which we found to be predominantly important for all the actors and stakeholders in this process. The first one is the process of election itself. There is overwhelming opinion voiced by most of those we spoke to that there needs to be a clarity and a clear timeline of the process of selection. So how this is going to be done, of course, is up to the state parties and the Assembly, but as long as it is timely considered and as long as it is very clear, then this is something that it's not a recommendation, it's simply a conclusion we came by after the talks we had. The second issue is vetting, or the due diligence, as we call it now. And I really have to say that this one we found to be really evolving through this process, and actually a lesson already learned. Because when we started, this was an issue brought to our attention by many state parties and civil society likewise. However, throughout our exercise, we have seen the evolution of the due diligence process in the sense that in the meantime, we designed a due diligence process for the election of the deputy prosecutors, then for the registrar, and there is, of course, a discussion now about the election of judges next year. So I'm really happy to say that this is a lesson that has been learned, and of course, this is, I think, one of the very big positives, not only from this exercise, but from the process of the previous prosecutor election. And finally, the third point, and then I hand over to Ambassador Marshik, is the consensus building exercise in the election process. Of course, the elections are legitimate, be it by a consensus or by elections, and this was stated by most of the state parties, if not all of them. However, there is a strong feeling that the consensus building exercise also needs to be well structured, in the sense that it is known when and how it begins, what are the deadlines, and when the next step is taken if consensus cannot be reached. There, with these 3 points, I finish, and I hand over to Ambassador Marshik. And thank you for your cooperation. Also, I would like to thank the President, Madam President, and the Vice Presidents, both of them of the Assembly, for their huge support during this process, and for believing that we can come up with something useful for the Assembly. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Now I give the floor to Ambassador Marshik.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ksenia, for these kind words also. Yes, it's my privilege now and my honor to reflect a little bit on the report itself. If you look at the report, and I've said this before, I fear it's not going to be a contender for the Booker Prize or for the Pulitzer, but it is hopefully going to be useful. And if you look at it, we have basically three parts, and the first part reflects a little bit what the mandate and the process was about. The second part is a rather lengthy and fairly monotonous part, which tries to give you an idea of all the information that we received, the feedback from the questionnaires and the reactions by the various stakeholders that we contacted. And the third part, the conclusion part, is in a way the points that we distilled from all the information that we received that should be or could be borne in mind when the next prosecutor selection process starts. And I will briefly just take you through some of the relevant points that could thus be borne in mind. First of all, there's a sort of a general commitment that we took from the reactions. Everyone we spoke to had the feeling that if we come up with a process, that process should be respected and adhered to as much as possible, despite the fact that there is, of course, always the possibility of holding an election. The framework under which such a process should take place should be a specific normative document well ahead of time, and that is agreed on in a transparent, open, and inclusive manner that includes all the stakeholders in the elaboration. Provisions should ideally build on past experience and be as precise, prescriptive as possible in order to avoid any ambiguities. When it comes to the shortlist, we heard a lot of comments on the shortlist. There was a very strong majority for the shortlist to be the result of a merit-based assessment. There should be enough time to allow a thorough search for potential candidates. That could be through a search committee. The resulting shortlist should be long enough to enable diversity of legal systems, of gender, and of regional distribution. The search committee, as well as the selection committee, should also reflect legal systems, gender, and the regional distribution. There was very clear will of people that we spoke to that there should be a clearly defined timetable for the whole process and also for the consensus finding part, and very clear provisions already from the beginning, from the outset, what happens when the establishment of consensus fails. We already mentioned the selection committee. On the other bodies, whether there is a committee on the election or a panel of experts, whether there are two bodies, such as we had this time, or whether perhaps in the future this can actually be combined into one larger body, all of that should be done very clearly. And if there are two bodies, there should be a very distinct partition of competences and mandates so that everyone knows precisely what functions they are supposed to carry out. Decision-making was also something that clearly came up, and there was a clear recommendation by those involved that the committee or committees should carry out the work on the basis of majority decisions. Xenia already mentioned vetting was an important point, and at the time when we conducted our consultations, something that had already been more or less accepted by everyone we spoke to as something that would be necessary. Whether this is a permanent vetting mechanism or an ad hoc basis, I think that will be up to a future to decide. I think there's work going on as we speak on this. We got a lot of recommendations on how the vetting process might look like, but I think basically that will, whether that includes background checks and reputational interviews, what kind of channel to receive third-party communications. I think we already have experience on some of the more recent selection processes that show that this is already on track, more or less, and that seems to be moving in a very good direction. Transparency and privacy, both of these issues were, of course, also came up in almost all the consultations that we led. There has to be a good balance between sufficient openness and transparency on one side, and of course confidentiality and the need to protect the privacy of the candidates on the other side. And that has to be very clear read from the beginning. It was also felt that candidates should be fully made aware of all the aspects of the process, what is expected from them in terms also of behavior, and also what participating in such a selection process could result to them. Some suggested that it would be useful perhaps to establish a set of guidelines. It was a very strong feeling among all the participants that the process should be inclusive as possible, and include stakeholders whenever possible, and that we should undertake every effort to avoid politicization, knowing full well that this is a political process, since the ICC is a very political court or institution, whether we like that or not. The effort should be undertaken to ensure that the resulting individual that results as at the end of the process has a maximum of legitimacy in place, and therefore also can rely on the maximum of support from member states. Consensus, another point that Xenia already raised finally. Everyone, of course, thought that consensus was important and something that you should strive for, that it is necessary to have a very clearly structured mechanism to also have an advance agreement on what exactly we expect from the process, and to have very strict guidelines. It was generally seen that this should be in the hands of the Assembly Presidency in cooperation with focal points representing the regional groups, and that states parties, but also all other stakeholders, should respect the efforts to find consensus and refrain from any acts that could counter the endeavors. So that basically were the points that we found. In short, a couple of ideas that we hope that future people involved in the selection process will bear in mind, to make the ICC prosecutor selection process as much as possibly consensual, fair, inclusive, transparent, confidential, merit-based, practicable, efficient, legitimate, appropriate, diligent, sustainable. This is an exercise for the interpreters now. Collaborative and fun if possible, as much as possible. But anyway, I think this is an effort that we hope will be useful. And of course, we know the next process is a long time off. There will be a different world then. So we'll see what of these points, which of these points will be taken up. That will be in the hands of the people then in charge. But we hope that with this, we've done a useful contribution. Let me maybe also just conclude by thanking you, Madam President, and also the members of the Bureau, and Renan and his team at the ASP Secretariat, and for all of you that supported and helped us in putting this report together. and as well as everyone here that has had the patience to listen to us this morning. And thank you, Ksenia, for being the best possible facilitator partner. If you ever need, anyone needs a good facilitator here in The Hague, take Ksenia. Thank you very much.
I thank you, ambassadors, for this very comprehensive, a very interesting presentation, very lively presentation as well. At this point, I would like to ask if any delegation would wish to take the floor at this stage. Mexico?
Extremely briefly, Madam President, just to thank both Ambassador Milenkovic and the Ambassador of Austria in New York for their excellent work, and to acknowledge that they made a very difficult job, made it seem simple, but we all know that it was very hard, and we are very grateful.
Thank you. Any other delegation wishes to take the floor at this stage? Nigeria?
Thank you, Madam President. Just to echo what my colleague said, the Ambassador of Mexico, about our gratitude, but I was just wondering, the description of the person you mentioned doesn't seem to be somebody we can find in real life. Diligent, exceptional, all kinds of adjectives that you use. And I was just making fun here that, does this person actually exist? The person is sustainable, all kinds of adjectives. But anyway, thank you very much for a job well done to both of you. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other delegation wishes to take the floor at this stage? I see none. If no other delegation wishes to take the floor, I would like to really thank the facilitators for the presentation today, but to thank them for four things. First, for accepting to be the facilitators, or was indeed, as the representative of Mexico has just said, a very difficult and at the time that when you started, quite a controversial exercise. So I thank you both for accepting this very complex process. Second, I would like to really thank you for the huge efforts you made to reach out, to ensure an extremely inclusive and transparent and comprehensive process as you described. This was extremely important for the success of the exercise. Third, I would like to thank you for the points you have identified to be borne in mind in the future for a better process. Indeed, this is a number of years ahead of us. I will not be taken up by us, but I really trust that these points will be of huge assistance for those who design the new process for the fourth prosecutor of the court. And fourth, I also would like to thank you for, you have highlighted that some of the lessons we have already learned and that we have already implemented, at least in part. Because indeed, the issue of due diligence, of vetting, as we used to call it at the time, was a big issue to be taken into account, and we have already implemented this concern for the elections of deputy prosecutor, registrar, and now we are thinking ahead for new elections, including for a permanent system of due diligence. So this is important to underline, and actually it's very much connected with the next segment of our plenary, which is the report of the independent oversight mechanism. The head of the IOM will present a report, which is in part also related to this very important endeavor. So I thank you very much to you, and we now adjourn for a few seconds or a few minutes this plenary in order to rearrange the setting and invite the head of the IOM to give his report. So thank you very much. We now turn to the annual report of the head of the Independent Oversight Mechanism, IOM, which covers the period from 1st October 2021 to 30 September 2022. This report has been issued as Assembly Document ICC ASP/21/8. I now invite Mr. Saklein Hedarali, head of the Independent Oversight Mechanism, to introduce the annual report.
Excellencies, distinguished representatives of states parties, and everyone here today, this is the first time that the Independent Oversight Mechanism presents its annual report in a plenary session of the Assembly. I am deeply grateful, Madam President, for this opportunity. As this is the first such occasion, it may be appropriate to first underline, for those who may be unfamiliar with the IOM, that it is a subsidiary body of the Assembly, and that it was already contemplated in the Rome Statute when it was devised in paragraph 112(4), although it came into existence only many years later. The mandate of the IOM, as you may know, is to provide comprehensive oversight of the court through the conduct of independent evaluations, inspections, and investigations, internal investigations. It is equally important to reiterate that the IOM is operationally independent from the court and reports directly to this Assembly. This Assembly, in fact, also amended Rule 26 of the Rules of Procedure and Evidence to give the IOM exclusive jurisdiction to investigate allegations of misconduct against elected officials, making this independence crucial to the fulfillment of its mandate. Madame la Présidente, lors de la dernière année, beaucoup des activités du mécanisme ont été associées, de près ou de loin, à la question de la culture de travail à la Cour. Tel que mentionné par le président Hoffmanski lundi dernier lors de la présentation de son rapport, le mécanisme a aidé la Cour à reviser son cadre réglementaire pour établir des procédures plus robustes par rapport aux procédures d'enquête et sanctions disciplinaires résultant de la mauvaise conduite des fonctionnaires de la Cour, et encore plus particulièrement en matière de harcèlement sexuel, de discrimination et d'abus de pouvoir. Ces politiques soit n'existaient pas ou ne répondaient plus aux besoins de la Cour. Ces nouvelles règles reflètent dorénavant et en ont été calquées sur celles que l'on retrouve dans la majorité des organisations de l'ONU. Il était d'autant plus important de recevoir ces instructions et de les revoir, étant donné que le 2/3 des affaires qui ont été sous examen par le mécanisme dans la dernière année concernaient justement des allégations reliées au harcèlement sexuel et à l'abus de pouvoir. Madam President, these court issuances, given the regulatory framework of the court, do not automatically apply to elected officials, only to staff members and consultants. I therefore asked all 22 elected officials of the court whether they would agree to sign a declaration of intent stating that they would also abide by the terms of the new instructions regarding harassment, sexual harassment, and abuse of authority, and refrain from engaging in such conduct. I am happy to report, Madam President, that all 22 elected officials agreed to do so. This is an important message that the leadership of the court has sent to its staff, that they are subject, at least in this respect, to the same rules as the staff of the court. Speaking of elected officials, Madam President, you detailed during the oral report of the Bureau on Monday the role that the IOM played in the due diligence processes for the elections of deputy prosecutors and registrar. The IOM has also taken note of the decision of the Bureau recommending to the Assembly that the IOM also assist in devising and conducting a similar process for the election of 6 judges to the court in 2023. And I hope that we will be able to assist the Assembly in this respect, should the Assembly so decide, and given the means to do so, in addition to the IOM's core functions. We also remain at the Assembly's disposal for any assistance in devising and discussing a permanent due diligence mechanism for elected official elections. Madam President, I mentioned the declaration of intent from elected officials a few minutes ago, but I must also mention, as President Hofmansky mentioned, that the judges of the court went one step further. They amended the Code of Judicial Ethics to formally bind themselves to this new anti-harassment policy. This is important because not only does it send a strong message, but it also is no longer a personal declaration, but one that will bind the new judges that will come in 2023 and hopefully those that come later. This amendment and achievement is directly related to the evaluation that the IOM conducted into the working culture of the judiciary of the court. The IOM commends the president of the court for having requested this evaluation in the wake of the troubling findings of the independent expert review of the court regarding this issue and the poor results emanating from staff engagement surveys. The IOM also commends the staff of the judiciary and the judges who overwhelmingly participated in this evaluation. Over 80% of staff spoke to the IOM about their lived experiences, and all 18 judges similarly participated, which gives the IOM conclusions even more weight and even more relevance. As noted, with these amendments of the Code of Ethics, the judges have already taken steps to implement some of the recommendations from the evaluation, and we hope that the other issues that we have raised will also be acted upon as soon as practicable. But, Madam President, one of the main features of the issues which we witnessed in the judiciary is one that is prevalent across the court. And I would submit across the entire Rome Statute system, including states parties, subsidiary bodies, and so on. Almost every single person with whom we spoke talked of the mandate of the court as one of the reasons why they had joined, how they had been moved by the ideals of the court, its desire to fight impunity, to provide justice for victims, and this was at all levels: interns, assistants, legal officers, senior staff, even judges. It was a constant feature. Somewhere along the way, however, these ideals and purposes seem to have either gotten lost or at the very least faded into the background, becoming divorced from day-to-day realities, challenges, be they operational, political, economic. Madam President, as I was preparing these remarks last night while I was watching the World Cup and thinking of how these ideals could be brought back to the forefront, the words of the great football and Arsenal manager Arsene Wenger came to my mind. He was once asked what was a defining feature of the truly great players, those who seemed to transcend the sport, and what separated them from others. His answer was that the truly great players put, or rather that they believed, that through their talents and skills, they were there to serve the game, while the others believed that it was football that was meant to serve them. My question, therefore, Madam President, for everyone that is here today, that is watching us, those working around the court, those working for the court, those working at the court, those in senior management positions at the court, like myself, and those in leadership position. And the question is, and I firmly believe is inextricably linked to the issue of work culture, is do we believe that the court is there to serve us and our interests, or do we believe, in a way, like Arsene Wenger said, the truly great athletes who transcend their sport Are we there to use our skills, our expertise, our experience, and our talents to serve the ideals upon which this institution was created? And it is my most sincere hope, Madam President, that when everyone reflects upon this question, the answer will be a resounding yes. This is what we are here, and this is how we can change the working culture in and around the court. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank you very much for your presentation, and I would like now to ask if any delegation would wish to take the floor at this stage. I see no request for the floor, so I would like to thank Mr. Heydar Ali for his presentation, but most importantly for the huge amount of work that was put throughout the year by Mr. Heydar Ali and his team in the exercise of their core mandate, but also in assisting the Bureau and this Assembly in developing the due diligence processes that we have put in place. And I really want to underline the importance of the IOM to contribute to enhance the performance and the work culture of the institution, which has been, which is indeed a huge priority for this Assembly. There are many recommendations of the review mechanism that relate to the work culture, and this is indeed a permanent effort of the court and the system as a whole that we need to really bear in mind in order to make sure that those working for the court, as you said, and those working for the system in general can really pursue the goals that make them join the court in the first place. So thank you very much for your words, your presentation, and your work throughout the year. So this concludes our work for this plenary session. And now the working group on program budget will meet in this room immediately after the adjournment of this meeting. So this meeting is adjourned.